You're good, you're good, you're good. We're good. Step left, step back forward. DD, we're up.
Entered and executed a system of justice against La Casa Nostra, to include the Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese crime family.
What happens when the nation's strongest fortress becomes the entry point for its most dangerous enemy? That question echoed across Washington the morning a routine compliance check inside the Pentagon uncovered something far more alarming than procedural mistakes. It revealed a threat hiding in plain sight just steps away from the Secretary of Defense's office. At a time when President Donald Trump publicly demands absolute loyalty within national security ranks, reinforced by stern warnings in recent Reuters and BBC reports about escalating cartel aggression, the discovery raised an even darker possibility if infiltration reached this deep. What else has slipped past America's defenses? The event began at 6:12 a.m. inside a quiet administrative wing of the Pentagon. Investigators inspecting a basic office workstation noticed a steel panel behind a standard printer. The panel was welded shut and blended seamlessly into the surrounding structure. Minutes later, after tools were brought in and the seal pried open, the room shifted from routine to crisis. Inside the compartment lay 3.8 kilograms of pure cocaine, $74,000 in cash, and a loaded 6-hour P320 pistol items completely out of place in one of the world's most secure military buildings. The discovery became even more explosive when the office was identified as belonging to Senior Policy Advisor Michael R. Hanford, a man entrusted with logistics navigation across multiple defense channels. Key developments escalated rapidly. According to internal briefings, later mirrored by reporting styles seen in DW and The Guardian, Hanford offered no explanation as agents cuffed him. No resistance, no denial. His silence unsettled investigators more than any outburst could have. Hours later, analysts at Quantico accessed his encrypted laptop. Inside, they uncovered routing logs tied to military cargo lists, timestamped communications with unidentified contacts, and evidence suggesting that CJNG operatives had gained access to secure logistics streams. Each file pulled the breach further away from the image of a lone corrupted insider, pushing it towards something far more coordinated. Strategic analysis circulated across senior defense desks before noon. The breach suggested not only a criminal pipeline, but a systemic vulnerability. Defense News and Jane's Defense Weekly have recently warned of rising attempts by transnational groups to exploit Western logistics chains. This incident confirmed their warnings with chilling clarity. If a cartel could penetrate secured federal infrastructure bypass clearance protocols and use a defense advisor as a distribution node, it meant the infiltration did not begin at the Pentagon. It merely surfaced there. The global implications were undeniable. Allies monitoring U.S. stability during heightened geopolitical tensions from Eastern Europe to the Indo-Pacific now faced the prospect that America's internal vulnerabilities could have external consequences. But beyond institutions and strategy, the human impact hit hardest. Staff who worked alongside Hanford daily were suddenly questioned. Entire corridors were locked down. Families of Pentagon employees received alerts clarifying that no external attack had occurred, but that a major internal breach was under investigation. Fear spread quietly. If a sealed office in the world's most protected building could hide a cartel compartment, could ordinary households, workplaces, or local agencies be equally exposed? Communities across Virginia began asking whether the danger originated closer to home than anyone imagined. As America confronts the balance between internal security and civil trust, one question lingers: if a hidden compartment behind a printer can open a doorway into the nation's most sensitive defenses, what deeper breaches still remain undiscovered, and who will expose them before the next crisis erupts? What if the real weapon wasn't the drugs found inside the Pentagon, but the data hidden inside a single encrypted laptop? That question took center stage as the investigation moved from physical evidence to digital exposure. Hours after Michael Hanford's arrest, analysts at Quantico began unlocking layers of information that redrew the boundaries of the threat. What looked like an isolated breach now resembled an engineered infiltration, a structure built quietly beneath the nation's defenses. And as new findings aligned with trends reported by Reuters, BBC, and Al Jazeera about transnational criminal networks expanding their digital sophistication, federal leaders realized the danger was no longer hypothetical. It was operational. The event that triggered this shift happened mid-morning when the laptop's first encrypted folder opened. Inside was a detailed routing log mapping 22 covert shipments disguised as military supply transfers. Each shipment moved through legitimate cargo channels authenticated by Hanford's digital clearance. The precision was striking. No sloppy codes, no accidental overlaps. Every document looked identical to genuine defense logistics paperwork. Senior analysts concluded that the cartel had studied the system long enough to replicate it, meaning infiltration had been deliberate, long-term, and strategically patient, an approach typically associated with state-level espionage, not narcotics groups. Key developments surfaced quickly. The second folder revealed a spreadsheet that read like a personnel index. 37 individuals, each assigned color-coded reliability tags. Some were federal logistics clerks, others were state procurement officers. A few were administrators with innocuous job titles but discrete database access. According to findings later compared with patterns described by DW's investigative reporters, the roles weren't chosen at random. These individuals occupied pinch-point small corners of the system where a forged signature, a misfiled shipment, or a delayed verification could open a corridor for illicit goods. Every name on that spreadsheet pointed to a structural flaw exploited with ruthless precision. The third folder delivered an even grimmer picture. 14 quiet suburban houses spanning Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina, all rented under clean identities. From the outside, they appeared ordinary lawns, trimmed cars, parked neatly, lights alternating at night. But they were occupied by CJNG members, blending into communities that never questioned a new neighbor. This form of embedded presence echoed warnings from The Guardian and Al Jazeera about criminal groups learning to camouflage into middle-class environments, a tactic once associated with European organized networks but now clearly adopted on U.S. soil. Strategic analysis accelerated as federal experts realized that this network functioned less like a cartel operation and more like a parallel infrastructure. Each folder exposed a separate layer, logistics personnel distribution hubs, all intertwined but independently functional. Jane's Defense Weekly has noted that modern transnational groups increasingly mimic military structures to ensure operational continuity even when individual units collapse. The same pattern emerged here. Removing Hanford did not break the system, it merely peeled back its first layer. The threat was adaptive, scalable, and disturbingly resilient. Meanwhile, the human impact stretched across multiple agencies. Employees learning they worked steps away from compromised colleagues felt a living sense of betrayal. Families in affected suburbs discovered their quiet streets had housed well-disguised operatives. Parents questioned how criminal networks could sit beside playgrounds without raising suspicion. Trust once broken became difficult to rebuild, especially when the infiltration had burrowed into both professional institutions and family neighborhoods. Now, as the evidence expanded beyond a single corrupted advisor, the deeper question emerged: if one encrypted laptop can reveal an entire network woven into federal and civilian life, how many other hidden systems might be operating undetected, and who will uncover them before the next breach surfaces? How does a nation react when a hidden enemy is suddenly exposed across multiple states at the same moment? That question defined the dawn hours following the Pentagon breach as federal command centers shifted into a posture normally reserved for foreign attacks. Files recovered from Hanford's laptop had identified multiple active cells scattered across the country, and according to analysts drawing parallels with recent Reuters and BBC reporting on coordinated multinational raids against cartel networks, the only effective response was simultaneous. Delay in one location could trigger escapes in another, so the order went out: execute all targets at once. The event began before sunrise. In Arlington, Virginia, the site of the initial breach surveillance teams monitored a quiet two-story suburban home believed to house a logistics cell. Neighbors thought a young couple lived there, but heat signatures painted a different picture. 5 men awake, armed and moving. At 5:03 a.m., an FBI breaching team advanced through darkness. The door detonated inward. Gunfire erupted from the staircase as cartel guards used short-barrel rifles to pin agents behind the kitchen counter. The firefight was fast, violent, and claustrophobic. In under a minute, 2 suspects were shot, 3 surrendered, and a pantry filled with methamphetamine and forged military shipping labels confirmed the house as a functioning node in the network. key developments unfolded simultaneously across the country. Outside Houston, a fortified steel warehouse became the site of a full-scale assault. A tactical MRAP smashed through the loading bay, sending sparks across concrete. Cartel riflemen fired from behind stacked engine blocks, rounds clanging off armored plating. Agents advanced in tight formation flashbangs, lighting the rafters. After a brief but brutal exchange, the structure fell silent. Inside, federal teams uncovered 118 rifles, 7 machine guns, and more than 40 kilograms of cocaine packed into crates, disguised as industrial vehicle parts, a tactic Reuters recently highlighted in cases involving European ports. Far west in the California desert, 3 CJNG operatives attempted escape the moment drones appeared overhead. Their black SUV tore across uneven terrain, dust clouds trailing behind. But DHS helicopters swooped in low, forcing the vehicle to halt. The suspects fled on foot, only to be intercepted by ground teams. Not a single shot was fired. The capture demonstrated the widening technological gap between federal aviation assets and cartel operatives, and Escalation Defense News has repeatedly noted as criminal groups adopt military-style mobility. At the Norfolk port, a quieter but equally significant operation took place. 6 containers each, bearing flawless federal seals, were minutes away from entering East Coast distribution pipelines. Officers intercepted them, pried open the steel doors, and uncovered chemical precursors, cash bundles, and high-purity cocaine. A retired procurement specialist whose signature had been forged across dozens of manifests was quickly identified as the missing link in the container chain. Strategic analysis later circulated across multiple agencies. These raids did more than seize contraband. They confirmed that the infiltration network functioned at scale. As DW and Al Jazeera have both emphasized in recent reporting on cartel expansion, modern criminal networks are no longer ad hoc operations. They operate like parallel supply chains, replicating the reliability of legitimate industries. The seizures proved that CJNG's infrastructure inside the US was not experimental, it was operational, resilient, and geographically diverse. The human impact rippled outward. Residents near Houston awoke to armored vehicles blocking intersections. Families in Virginia found their cul-de-sacs lit by tactical floodlights. Dock workers in Norfolk realized they had unknowingly handled containers destined for a criminal ecosystem embedded deep inside domestic logistics. For many Americans, the raids shattered the comforting belief that cartel operations remained distant border issues. The danger had moved into neighborhoods, workplaces, and commercial ports. By sunrise, the tally was staggering: 2.1 tons of narcotics, 221 firearms, and 58 arrests. Yet despite the operational success, the central question loomed larger. If this was only one branch of the network, how many more quietly mirrored it across the country, and how long before the next wave surfaces where no one is looking? What if the real danger wasn't the raids, the gunfire, or the arrests, but the discovery that every seized operation was only one piece of a much larger invisible machinery? That unsettling realization spread across federal command centers as analysts began piecing together documents seized from Virginia, Houston, California, and Norfolk. What they uncovered resembled not a cartel network hiding in America, but a shadow infrastructure built beneath it, a parallel system running alongside legitimate supply chains, businesses, and government operations. And according to patterns highlighted in investigations by Reuters, DW, and The Guardian, this kind of structural mimicry marks a new era of organized crime, one that functions like a state within a state. The event that triggered this revelation took place in a quiet federal building in Boston. Analysts cross-referencing shipping logs and seized financial records noticed clusters of identical routing points. When layered digitally, these points formed 3 distinct corridors: weapons, narcotics, and finance. The visualization looked less like scattered criminal activity and more like an engineered blueprint. Each corridor used legitimate American businesses, small trucking firms, warehouse distributors, veterinary chemical suppliers as camouflage for illicit flow. Nothing in the data appeared sloppy. Everything appeared intentional. Key developments emerged as each corridor was dissected. The weapons corridor traced through trucking companies in Texas and Tennessee. Publicly, these firms transported engine parts and industrial components, cargo regularly delivered to military bases. But invoices pulled from the Houston warehouse showed duplicate part numbers used to conceal crates of rifles and machine guns. Each legal crate had an illegal twin. It was a mirrored supply chain flawlessly executed. The narcotics corridor was equally sophisticated. Suburban warehouses and mom-and-pop shipping companies along the East Coast were used to disguise disguise meth and cocaine as medical-grade chemicals. At Norfolk, federal seals on seized containers were traced back to a retired procurement specialist in Delaware, an individual whose signature had been quietly copied and reused for months. According to BBC and DW reporting on European port infiltrations, this tactic is common in high-level smuggling networks. Compromise one insider, replicate their credentials, and keep the system running until discovery becomes impossible to avoid. But the financial corridor was the darkest revelation. It spanned nail salons, auto repair shops, grocery stores, and federal procurement channels, ordinary businesses producing ordinary cash flows. Yet when analysts added overseas wire data, dormant links to Mexico, Guatemala, and Colombia illuminated entire neighborhoods. Money laundering was not happening at the fringes. It was happening inside communities that trusted these businesses daily. The Guardian has warned repeatedly that modern criminal organizations build economic ecosystems instead of just criminal chains. The US now faced proof of that evolution. Strategic analysis deepened the alarm. The network wasn't merely infiltrating institutions, it was imitating them. Its three-corridor design mirrored traditional military logistics, weapons, supply, finance. Jane's Defense Weekly has noted that cartels increasingly adopt hierarchical military-like structures to survive leadership losses and law enforcement disruption. The system uncovered here fit that model perfectly. Even if Hanford fell, even if every safe house was raided, the architecture remained intact. It had been designed not to collapse, but to regenerate. The human impact spread quickly. Neighborhoods that once felt safe discovered that unassuming homes were cartel hubs. Small business owners were questioned about financial irregularities they never noticed. Employees in federal offices realized their co-workers' people they ate lunch beside had been compromised. Trust eroded quietly but powerfully. Parents asked how such a system could grow beneath everyday life without raising alarm. Workers in ports, warehouses, and trucking firms feared they had unknowingly helped move illicit cargo. For millions of Americans, the crisis no longer felt distant. It felt uncomfortably close. As analysts stepped back and looked at the full map, a web spanning 9 federal agencies in multiple states, one question overshadowed everything. If this shadow infrastructure existed parallel to America's legitimate systems, how many more unseen networks are already operating under the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to emerge? What happens to a nation when the threat stops hiding and begins reacting? That question defined the chaotic hours after federal agencies realized the infiltration was deeper than anyone imagined. For months, maybe years, CJNG operatives had blended into bureaucracy, shipping centers, and procurement offices. But once the network was exposed, the response from compromised insiders shifted from quiet participation to desperate survival. According to patterns documented in Reuters and DW investigations into collapsing corruption rings, the moment of exposure is often the most dangerous phase, not because the network is strong, but because it is cornered. The event that triggered the internal collapse began in Maryland. A logistics clerk flagged for questioning due to suspicious routing approval spotted investigators entering the building. Instead of complying, he fled. He sprinted through a parking garage, drew a pistol when confronted, and was subdued only after a chaotic struggle. Later searches of his home uncovered burner phones and unexplained cash deposits. The flight confirmed something federal analysts feared: the infiltration wasn't passive corruption, it was active collaboration. And now operatives were panicking. Key developments spread across the country within hours. In Charlotte, agents arrived to question a mid-level coordinator linked to forged warehouse records. His cubicle was empty. His badge lay on the desk. Security footage showed him escaping through a wooded trail behind the building. His abandoned backpack was later recovered under a highway overpass filled with prepaid phones and $800 in cash. Denver, 2 federal contractors attempted a bold sabotage operation. They stole access key cards and tried to enter a restricted server closet to erase routing logs connected to the financial corridor. The moment they swiped the stolen badges, a silent alarm triggered. Tactical units intercepted them before any files were deleted. According to BBC and Guardian reporting on insider sabotage cases, this type of last-minute destruction attempt is a hallmark sign that a network is collapsing from inside pressure. The most alarming confrontation unfolded in a secure communications facility outside Tampa. A senior technician barricaded himself inside a data terminal room, severed fiber lines, smashed encrypted hardware, and attempted to download classified routing matrices onto a personal drive. As tactical teams breached the door, he shouted that investigators didn't understand how large the system really was. A chilling echo of warnings in Al Jazeera's reporting on cartel structures that continue functioning even after major arrests. Analysis across federal agencies now reach reached a grim consensus. This wasn't isolated misconduct, nor a handful of compromised employees. The infiltration had spread across 9 federal agencies, each exhibiting the same symptoms: missing workers, wiped computers, shredded documents, sudden resignations, and attempted data breaches. Defense News has repeatedly warned that modern transnational organizations excel at exploiting bureaucratic blind spots rather than brute force weaknesses. The U.S. was now seeing that vulnerability firsthand. The human impact was immediate and profound. In offices across the country, coworkers realized that the person they sat beside for years might have been quietly undermining national security. Supervisors questioned how many performance reviews, promotions, and commendations had been unknowingly given to cartel-linked operatives. Families of federal employees received notifications of internal lockdowns and access restrictions. Trust already strained by the Pentagon breach fractured further. Everyday Americans watched press updates and wondered how deeply the infiltration reached into the systems they depend on: airports, ports, supply chains, data centers, and even public safety offices. Now, as the country confronted an unprecedented internal breakdown, a haunting question emerged: if this level of infiltration happened without public awareness, what hidden networks might still be operating, silently waiting for their moment to surface when the nation is most distracted? What does it mean when a nation must rebuild its security from the inside out? That question framed the emergency gathering in Washington as leaders from the FBI, DHS, DOJ, DOD, ICE, ATF, and multiple state agencies convened inside a secure room. The infiltration exposed over the past week was no longer viewed as a criminal operation. It was treated as a structural threat. Senior officials realized that CJNG had not merely penetrated individual offices. It had mapped the federal government like a blueprint. Every gap, every overlooked process, every unsecured channel had been exploited. And this realization echoed warnings published by Reuters, BBC, and Jane's Defense Weekly about transnational groups rapidly evolving into quasi-military systems capable of challenging state institutions through stealth rather than force. The event that marked the turning point occurred at 9:15 a.m. on Friday. Screens across the conference room displayed maps, timelines, and digital overlays connecting raids in Virginia, Houston, California, and Norfolk to dozens of compromised offices across 9 federal agencies. Red markers stretched across the United States like fractures in a national foundation. Faced with this unprecedented landscape, the Secretary of Homeland Security announced a new entity, the Federal Integrity Restoration Task Force, FIRTF. Its mandate carried extraordinary authority, not to audit, not to observe, but to dismantle, remove, and rebuild every corrupted channel uncovered during the investigation. Key developments began immediately. Teams were deployed into procurement offices, shipping control centers, communications hubs, and clearance departments. They uncovered forged HR identities buried inside databases, unauthorized badge replicas used to bypass secure doors, procurement requests linked to shell companies, and encrypted communication portals disguised as ordinary software updates. Each discovery revealed that the network had been engineered for durability. It did not collapse quickly because it had been designed not to break at all. Meanwhile, field teams across multiple states launched a second wave of operations aimed at dismantling the infrastructure that had supported the infiltration. In New Jersey, agents raided a storage unit stocked with unused federal uniforms and counterfeit access cards. In Phoenix, they seized a data router quietly transmitting government shipping manifests to servers in Mexico City. In Seattle, they located an unmarked home rented under the name of a deceased veteran. Inside were laptops accessing procurement databases and heat maps mirroring cartel distribution routes. DW and The Guardian have both reported that criminal organizations now replicate the intelligence functions of state actors. These discoveries provided chilling confirmation. Strategic analysis inside Washington shifted accordingly. The infiltration was no longer seen as a breach. It was now understood as an ecosystem, a web of civilian businesses, federal offices, regional contractors, and logistics channels fused into a network capable of operating beneath public awareness. Analysts compared the structure to insurgent networks studied in defense news reports: decentralized nodes, redundant routes, and adaptive logistics designed to survive arrests, seizures, or leadership losses. The pattern fit perfectly. Yet the human impact remained the most sobering consequence. Federal workers stood in lines for emergency revetting. Contractors faced renewed scrutiny. Employees who spent careers serving the country now found themselves questioned about colleagues they trusted. Small businesses that unknowingly laundered cartel money feared collapse. Families in suburbs across the East Coast discovered quiet homes on their streets were actually operational safe houses. The America was forced to acknowledge that its vulnerability did not stem from external enemies breaching borders, but internal enemies exploiting trust. As officials reviewed the final map, still incomplete, still revealing new nodes, a profound uncertainty settled over the room. The nation had responded swiftly, it had acted decisively, but the fear remained. If dismantling one network reveals only the first layer, how many more remain hidden beneath the systems Americans rely on every day? The investigation that began with a hidden steel compartment inside the Pentagon exposed a threat far more complex than a single corrupted advisor. It revealed an infiltration network engineered with precision, mirroring the structure of legitimate U.S. institutions. Covert shipments disguised as military cargo suburban safe houses embedded in quiet neighborhoods, and dozens of compromised officials across 9 federal agencies showed how deeply CJNG operatives had burrowed into the national system. Nationwide raids confirmed the scale of the operation, seizing tons of narcotics and hundreds of weapons, yet also proving that these seizures represented only fragments of a larger architecture. Analysts uncovered 3 parallel corridors, weapons, narcotics, and finance running beneath the country like a shadow infrastructure. As exposed insiders fled sabotage systems and attempted data destruction, the federal government entered a wartime posture rarely seen in domestic crises. In response, the newly formed Federal Integrity Restoration Task Force began dismantling counterfeit access systems, seizing covert communication nodes, and rebuilding compromised channels from the inside out. The crisis underscored a fundamental truth: America's greatest vulnerabilities can emerge not from foreign borders, but from blind trust exploited within. And now the nation must confront a sobering question: if this network hid in plain sight for years, what other unseen dangers lie beneath